Hello, and welcome everyone to our Vistatec Life Sciences in Focus podcast, fascinating conversations with global life sciences experts. This is a space where we interview life sciences experts once a month, and I'm your host, Karen Katchik. I am really happy to be talking with today's guest, Victoria Donovan, who's an award-winning leader in clinical research and currently CEO and founder of Clinically Media. Victoria has a lot going on in her fascinating career, and I'm grateful to have you here today. And please tell our listeners, to start with, a little bit about your origin story and where you are now.
I'm Victoria Donovan. I'm Karen said, founder and CEO of Clinically Media, which is a patient recruitment firm for clinical research trial participants. And I started my career as a consultant, or really like freelance graphic designer, marketer, content marketer, social media marketer in small businesses. I ended up getting what turned out to be a career pivoting gig working in out of biotech on a very simple instructional sheet to like on a, how to use the specific balance in a protocol. That led to other work at the biotech. And they asked me if I knew how to do patient recruitment. And I was young, and of course I said yes. And, figured if I knew how to do social media marketing, I could figure it out. And I did figure it out, but it turns out there's a lot more to it than I initially had thought. But did a good job, did a good enough job. I got hired back and ended up building up a client base that was more than I could handle, and then founded Clinically Media from there. And it's been 8 years now, or almost 8 years now.
Yeah, lovely. Well, isn't it? It's always good to hear those origin stories, how people ended up in clinical research, for instance.
Yeah.
There's usually a quirk along the way. Not that many people, when they were 8, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a patient in patient recruitment for clinical trials. It's not the common answer. So it's usually an interesting answer. So tell us a little bit more about what Clinically Media is today. What's your USP? Why do people choose you and
Yeah.
love working
So
with you?
so we work with CROs, we work directly with sponsors, and we work directly with research sites too to find really like
Mhm.
specific patient populations that are needed for these clinical trials. And there's a lot of patient recruitment companies are quantity over quality, and by design, where they are running ads and they're doing outreach for clinical trials and really just pulling in as many people as possible, and then allowing the research sites to sift through them. We go a quality over quantity approach. So we pull in fewer folks, but they're more qualified. We have a pretty intensive pre screening process. And then we actually work with the patients, call them on the phone, do additional pre screening, and get them scheduled for their study visit, and then make sure that they show up for their study visit. And we've found that and really, that's what the data has shown, that patients, there's a back up a second. There's a big gap in the patients who say they're interested in participating in a clinical trial, actually like fill out the initial form, and who actually show up for that study visit. So we're trying to increase the ratio of patients that come through our form that actually show up and that actually, of course, enroll in the study. So we've found that patients who are cared about and who we talk to, like we actually care that they show up, and we give them directions on how to get to the site and make sure they know that they're going to be a really important part of the study, because they are. Patients are like absolutely integral in getting any drug or device approved. That when they know that they care and they know that they matter, it's more likely that they actually show up for their study visit. So we're doing things constantly to increase the patient, experience. That's so kind of generic and vague, but really to increase the patient experience, which increases the patient, or increase the
Yeah,
value of how the patient
yeah,
feels they are when they participate in the study, which increases the amount of patients who enroll in the study and then stay in the study through the end. I mean,
yeah,
some studies are years long, and we really need patients to be engaged throughout the entire process.
yeah. That makes sense. I can see why that would be appealing. as a
Totally.
in a
No, and you
partnership.
look at it, you're like, of course, people, if you are cared about,
Yep.
you're going to go do something.
Yep. Yep. And people who are nurtured and who truly understand what being involved in a particular trial means are much more likely to conclude, right? To get to the end of that trial and not drop out along the way, let alone to show up for the first one.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay, so you know what we do here at Vistatec, the language piece of the puzzle. So my brain is going in one direction. Do you have any interesting examples of recruiting for studies where you might have been, let's say, in the deep end, culturally or
My
linguistically?
gosh, yes. So we recruit globally. So we're
Mm-hmm.
most of our materials, even if we're recruiting just in the US, we're always translating materials from English into Spanish. So we already have two
Mm-hmm.
sets of materials no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what gets really interesting is if you have studies who are recruiting a specific, like only one ethnic group, or you're recruiting completely outside the US, you can translate the materials you make in English into Spanish, into Chinese, into Italian, and lose a ton of meaning and lose a ton of cultural significance. So one of my I got two cool examples. So one is a this was a study that was only in the US. We were recruiting for Parkinson's patients or recruiting Parkinson's patients for a Parkinson's treatment. We needed patients who were treatment naive, but were quite advanced in their Parkinson's disease. And in the US, typically patients who are diagnosed with Parkinson's are kind of diagnosed and given treatment within the same kind of breath. And most patients do not have advanced Parkinson's without having treatment. We discovered through some market research and really just conversations with patients that Spanish speaking patients, because of just Hispanic culture from patients who were not necessarily from the US, specifically in Mexico, that patients who are diagnosed with Parkinson's really were getting a terminal diagnosis and treatment wasn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily part of their diagnosis like it is in the US, which opened up an entire world of patients who were qualified for this study. Um, and we found that running a campaign that really was entirely in Spanish, I didn't really speak to any of the patients. I just coordinated from the background, but we did Spanish speaking webinars and we translated all the materials we had into Spanish. For a second time, they were already translated. We did a different translation just to change the wording a little bit because it wasn't landing with the population. So it's an exercise and not just translating kind of word for word, which would be easy. It's a cultural translation, and we ended up, getting the last few patients into the study that way, and it's a really hard study to recruit for. Because then too, with these translated materials, you have to make sure that they're used at sites where those Spanish speaking patients can come and someone's actually able to speak Spanish to them and the PI can
Yeah.
speak Spanish and they don't need to bring their mom or their son or their caregiver with them, which is like that's a whole other layer of coordination to participate in a study that decreases the patient experience and that increases the chances that they're going to end up not completing the study. Another cool one. So this was a aesthetic dermatology study, which it's those are like stereotypically easy to recruit for.
Right.
Once you get into it, they're not as easy if you have a novel aesthetic product because you're looking for patients who want to look better, but you're giving them something that could potentially like have adverse events or you're messing with people's faces and things that are
Mm-hmm.
very and it's already people who want to look better. We were working with a company that was bringing their drug to China, and to work with the Chinese regulatory system they needed to have a study that had been done in the US but with 100% ethnically Chinese patients. And we again had materials that were just straight translated from English to Chinese because it was like a hey, we need these patients in a month kind of thing. And we're like, oh my gosh. So we translated everything really quickly and kind of ran with it. And very quickly, this was, earlier on in my career is one of the big learning experiences, but very quickly we learned that they and just culturally, the way that clinical trials are viewed, the way that even just visiting your doctor is viewed in China, and then with these patients who are 100% ethnically Chinese, so really very culturally Chinese, were not resonating with our materials. And to them, these materials were like, hey, you're gonna get free treatment. It's gonna be like, it's part of a clinical trial, treat this thing, here's the results we've had before. Seemed really coercive and like, well, why would I get free treatment? Free treatment seemed like that seems like a scam. And it came off really scammy, where in the US, those materials came across as really medical. So we did a whole other, again, like whole other campaigns specifically with materials that were for these Chinese patients, all the way down to different graphics and different colors and
For
different
sure.
layouts on the page, which all those things like come with translation that are so beyond what anyone that is not in
Yeah.
the culture would be able to do. And we wouldn't have been able to get the studies enrolled without
Yeah. That
like
cultural nuance is so
yeah,
critical, right? And
huge.
you're
It's
right.
huge.
Localization is more than the words, right? It's more than just translating the words. It's
Absolutely.
finding the sweet spot that lands and resonates with that target population. And you gave
Mhm.
two very different examples of very different target populations where you need completely different needs. Yeah, those are
Completely.
examples. Um, you learned the hard way, didn't you? We met more recently. Our listeners, Victoria and I met more recently than those clinical trials. Yeah, no, those are fabulous examples. Thank you very much for those. So, looking forward then, I know that you have a new initiative in the works, a new and exciting project. Can you tell our listeners all about that?
Oh, I would love to. So I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but our goal is always to increase the patient experience while participating in clinical trials. And a lot of that we've found comes from the communities that are built around patients. And patient advocacy groups are fantastic resources to find patients for clinical trials and to communicate clinical trial like updates and what potential new treatments are on the line. We've taken that model of creating a community of patients and applied it to the really cool stuff happening in psychedelic research right now. So we do a lot of recruitment in the CNS space. So anything like from, like I mentioned, Parkinson's to schizophrenia to depression and to anxiety. There are really, really interesting studies happening right now in the psychedelic space. So a lot of derivatives of psilocybin, and patients are so excited to participate in these studies, are really interested in the mechanism of action, really interested in how they can get involved. Ketamine therapy is really taken off now as kind of an alternative to traditional, especially for patients with depression, to people who have treatment resistant depression. And we have a big database of patients who's been asking about psychedelic research and wants to participate. So we just launched this, and we already have we're a tenth of the way to our end of year goal of how many members we want in this community. But really a community of patients where we can, and patients and healthcare providers and coordinators and researchers and scientists that can all kind of come together and learn from each other. So we're in the midst of planning virtual and in-person get-togethers and events. And the ultimate goal is that we'll be able to get these patients in clinical trials that are near them when they start enrolling. They're competitive to get into. You kind of need to know they're going to happen. There's like a line out the door to participate in these kind of studies.
Right.
So we want patients to know about studies that are going to benefit them or potentially benefit them before they even start enrolling, so that they can be in connection with that research site and make sure that they're in line to participate if they qualify. And if they don't qualify for that one, is there something else that's happening that they would also
Yeah.
be interested in? So it's another way we can provide value to our network of patients we already have, and then get them involved with other patients and other like-minded folks and get their questions answered. And it's just
Mhm.
such cool research that's
I
new and
have
exciting, and there's money in it.
two questions. I have two questions. Yes, sure. Yes, absolutely, there is. Two questions. So the first one is, what's it called? You didn't tell us its name.
Oh, called Psychedelta, which is
Because you're
a
changing.
combination
Delta,
of
yes,
so
delta has
delta,
changed.
right? So
Tell us.
delta's change, and then psycha, which is the kind of psychedelic Psychedelta.
Great. And we'll put, for our listeners, we'll put the links to Psychedelta in show notes and, in our social media
Yes.
posts. So you'll be able to find that and share it with your loved ones who you think might be interested in joining that group. And secondly, so for our listeners, both Victoria and I are based in Colorado, where more things are legal than in some other parts of the world. Do trials for psilocybin and the like, do they have to take place in a place like Colorado where consuming such products is allowed, or can they take place anywhere? That's an honest question. I don't know the answer.
So the research sites that are running these psychedelic research studies are Schedule 1 certified research sites. There's a huge process
Okay.
with the DEA they need to go
So,
through.
right,
And there's more and more that are getting added to this. I mean, there was like two
right.
or three a couple of years ago, and now there's a whole bunch. You can hardly keep track of them.
Okay.
But the studies, these are like all day, 8 hour kind of inpatient
Right.
studies that you're participating in. Like you're literally
Because,
you're tripping in your doctor's office is
right, you
what's
have to
happening.
be awake,
Yes,
right?
you have to be awake. You're real like you at the core of it, you're literally going into a clinic and you're tripping for they're working on shortening the trip, but right now, I mean, you're there for 8 hours and you're not actively tripping that entire time. But that's what's happening. It's a pretty big deal. They're expensive studies to run for that reason. I mean, you have
Mhm.
a room with a bed and they're nice. I mean, it looks like you're going to
You're
like
right.
a
Comfortable places to
nice
be.
Airbnb. Yeah. I mean, it's very comfortable. It's very nice. But these research sites have gone through
Right.
ton to be able
Yeah.
to run these
No.
studies.
Yes. No. Schedule 1 DEA. I should have known that, but in my head, I'm like, wait, how do
Yeah.
they? How is it? Why is how is it legal? So you answered the question. That's how it's legal in the US at least. I don't know
Yeah.
how it works in the various other global jurisdictions, but yeah, very interesting. And as we all know, not enough research has been done on that kind of medication for all the obvious reasons. So I can imagine why there's a lot of people who want to be involved in the research. I can imagine there's a kind of untapped mass of people who would be excited to participate in research. So I can see why you've picked that as a sort of, I'm not sure if blue ocean's the right term, but it's not exactly untapped, but I get where you're coming from there. So good, well done. Good, congratulations. Um, So I suppose we should come to an end, right? We shouldn't. We could talk for hours, but so before we go, what else? Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience about patient recruitment, about your world, about clinical media? What else would you like to share with the audience before we wind
I
things up?
want to acknowledge, and I try to do this as much as possible, that patient recruitment is really hard, and that there's sometimes it happens and it's easy, and you run your ads and patients come and your trial gets enrolled. Other times you have a complicated protocol. You're looking for a super specific population of people. It can be really hard, and it doesn't just happen. You need to be super prepared and have a kind of full campaign with your plan B, your plan C, your plan D, and when to bring in. Like, when do you bring in the big guns? Be like, no, we're going to run the $50,000 ad and get this study enrolled because October's rolling around, and we know that as soon as Thanksgiving hits, we're not going to be able to get anyone into the clinic before the new year. And our end of study goal is, to be enrolled by December 31st,
Christmas.
which is everybody's goal, and it's an insane goal just with the holidays. But I want to, yeah, if you're struggling with patient recruitment, I would love to lend my shoulder to cry on. It's
Mm.
can be really hard, and sometimes you're doing everything right, and you're just playing a really hard numbers game um, that needs to just have a little more time to play out. So I would love to chat and share if I think there's more that you could be doing, or if you really are doing what you're supposed to be doing and it's just a really hard project on your hands. Patient recruitment's hard. we've gotten good at it. And I've gotten good at it because I've done it now for 8 years and really was doing it before I founded the company too. So I forget that there's so much nuance to it because you know exactly where to go at a certain point, but it can be really, really challenging. And it doesn't just happen 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100.
Yeah, I love that. And to our listeners from personal experience, I can tell you that Victoria is a very good connector, conversationalist, thinker. Take her up on that offer. It's always a pleasure to talk things over with Victoria. Well, thank you so much for your insights and telling us what's going on in your world. Exciting stuff, clearly. And to our audience, this Life Sciences in Focus podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other leading platforms, as well as on YouTube if you prefer to watch it. Please make sure to tune in again next month for Vistatec Life Sciences in Focus. Fascinating conversations with global life sciences experts.